Hey, welcome to Songwriter's Tales. I'm Mark.
I'm Craig.
And Craig, who do we have on today?
I'm glad you asked me that, Mark. We've got a person that our audience out here is going to have a big question mark in their mind going, what in the world does a man that has a degree in microbiology, electrical engineering, and aerospace engineering, what does that person have to do with Songwriter's Tales with Mark and Craig?
Let's find out. Let's do it. Hey, we're back with Songwriter's Tales. I'm Mark.
And I'm Craig.
And Craig, we have a special guest today, John King. I'm going to let you, since John is a lifelong friend of yours, I'm going to let you give him his proper due.
That's correct. And a lifelong friend is right. Hi, John.
Hi, Craig. Hi, Mark.
Hey, John. Thank you for coming.
Yeah.
So John and I have known each other a very, very long time. I'm trying to do the math exactly. It's coming up on 60 years, I think, coming up on it. I met John when I was 11 years old, 11, 12 years old.
Yeah, something
and
like that.
That's right. And John is the older brother of my best friend, Richard. And the way that we met was because I was good friends with Richard, so I pretty much lived over at Richard and John's house. Down on the south side of Atlanta. And through that, Richard and I started a band. And then by the time I turned 17, that band kind of was fizzling out. And John had a band. John's, what are you, 4 years older than me? Something like that?
No, more than that. Let's see. I'm
Oh, yeah.
5 years older than my little brother, and I think he's 1 year older than you.
He is. Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So John and all of his buddies in his group, they had started a band. And they were starting to play underground Atlanta. And John was a guitar player. In fact, he owned the very first Les Paul Gibson that I ever saw in my life, for real. And so John needed a guitar player in their band because John was a rhythm guitar player primarily, and I was a lead guitar player. So I ended up at 17 joining that band called Blackjack in the mid 70s, underground Atlanta. We played all the clubs. So. Now this is a different kind of podcast today to our audience. I'm speaking because John is no longer a working musician. He's not in the music business. Hasn't been in forever. In fact, John was tell us what your title was at Delta Airlines, John.
I was the chief information officer.
Wow.
Yeah.
So everybody just went, huh? What?
And what does that mean?
Yeah,
it means the poor guy that has to be responsible for all the computers and communications and all that stuff.
The poor guy.
For an airline, that must have been horrible.
Well, it was great. I think I was lucky. I grew up with all these airline people around me. So by the time it came to do that job, I had a pretty good understanding of how everything in an airline worked.
So the question on everybody's mind is, so what does a data guy from Delta have to do with Songwriter's Tales with Mark and Craig? Well, I'm about to explain it. Here we go. Here's the big mystery. So when we were in bands, John was my first mentor as a leader, as a manager, as a organizer, a go-getter. And we started off as a bunch of hayseeds down on the south side of town, baling hay with, out in the country.
Yeah.
And we had this band. And then all of a sudden, within a year or two, we were one of the top bands in the South. And I'm not saying that arrogantly, but
no,
it
you were.
It was a fact. Yeah.
That's the truth.
Yeah. And there was a reason for that. And it was all about somebody knew what they were doing when they were organizing it, managing it, and motivating everybody. Now, the reason that Mark and I have this podcast is because we want to be a motivator to anybody who's listening, whether you're a songwriter, whether you're an artist that wants to get full-time professional business, whether you're in a band, whether you want to have a publishing company, or you want to be a producer or an engineer in a studio. Well, there's some basics you need to know if you're going to do that, and that's why we have John on here to talk about what it means to be a professional and have a professional attitude and a professional mindset. So, was that enough introduction that maybe you could talk now, John, since you are our guest?
Talk a little bit about it. Well, it's an interesting thing to try to understand. You get in bands, and as always, the first thing you try to do is surround yourself with reasonable people that don't go nuts all the time. I was somebody who wanted to make sure that people showed up when they were supposed to show up, and we understood what the budgeting, all of the business side of the band. I had been doing businesses since I was a kid. I just was always an entrepreneur, so I always had 2 or 3 businesses going out in the country. There are a lot of products that you can sell that come off the farm, and I was a little farm boy. But we were, I think, as natural musicians as you could probably have, because not many of us had played with music sheets in front of them and everything else. I don't think Craig had. I don't think anybody had except me and maybe the bass player. And we had been in high school bands and things like that. So
Mm-hmm.
we very quickly got to the point where we could play music, a lot of cover songs. We weren't writing hardly anything then, but
Mm-mm.
we pretty quickly got to the place where we could play music and it sounded really good. And it was music like The Who and Led Zeppelin and all of these things that we liked, but we could really play it. But I noticed my big lesson came in underground Atlanta, I think, and then at the Atlanta Coliseum. But I knew sounded better than everybody else, but we weren't drawing the crowds down in underground Atlanta that it seemed like we should if we were sounding that good. So I remember one day we were practicing in my basement, and the Who were in town that night, and we had not even given a moment's thought to going up to see the Who. And but we were in it. We got through practicing early, and we decided to go up and buy tickets for the Who. Well, the tickets we bought were behind the stage, basically, is what they had left. So we were all grousing and complaining about those tickets. And then as we got closer and closer to the time when the Who was going to start, you started feeling the excitement, I would call it. And I'm sitting there watching this, and we were behind the PA cabinet on one side of the stage, and there was a guy down there with what I would say now was the mixing board for the stage monitors, and he had all of this equipment around him and everything. Nobody from the band was on the stage, but the guy that looked like he was driving the monitors, he was sitting there and he had a big countdown clock on top of his console. And I remember thinking, now what's this clock here that's going backwards before the Who concert? And this thing, it was about 10 minutes when we walked in and sat down, and 5 minutes, and somewhere around 2 minutes, you start feel like the building is starting to rumble a little bit, or something is going on that's making you a little more sensitive to what's going on around here. Something interesting is happening. And I'm sitting there watching all of this, and we're all, laughing and telling jokes and everything else. But I am so zoned in by this time. I knew there was something going on, and I wanted to understand what it was. So I'm sitting there watching this, and it goes down to 60, and it's starting to get pretty loud. Music is starting to come in. It was actually a low frequency sound before the music lead-ins even started. And so I'm sitting there and I'm watching this, and the countdown is now at 30 seconds and 25 and 20, and it is really loud, like something's really going to happen. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, well, of course, what's going to happen is the Who's going to start playing, but they aren't even on stage yet. Where are these guys? So somewhere around like 10 or 15 seconds, on the clock, I see Townsend. We were on that side of the stage, kind of ramble up from where he was, and you could see Keith Moon kind of sliding in and crouching down behind the drums and on through with Daltrey and Entwistle. And I'm sitting there and watching all of this, and the countdown, is something like 8 seconds or something, in the intro tape is really loud. And I'm sitting there watching this thing, and Townsend is talking to the stage monitor mixer like you and I are talking. It's like, where do you want to go for dinner after the show? You could just see they looked like they were completely disconnected from the fact that in like 6 seconds they were going to have to do something. So this thing is counting down and counting down and counting down. And right at like about 1 second, Townsend takes one last puff on his cigarette, facing away from the center of the stage, puffs it, drops it on the floor, puts his toe on it, does a 180-degree pivot back to pointing to the stage, and just takes off running into the dark. And I'm sitting there going, "What in the world is this?" And boy, the first suddenly 8 spotlights come on and hit Townsend, and he's like 4 feet up in the air, getting ready to land on his knees and slide across the stage. And he's doing that full circle swing of his. And when the clock hit zero, all those lights came on, and Townsend was 4 feet in the air and hitting the ground and skipping across the stage. And they were so loud and so surprising to the audience, who just were sitting there not necessarily knowing what was going on either, that it knocked everybody back. You could literally see everybody in the first 25 or 30 feet of the audience get knocked back about 5 feet with a sudden roar of sound and lights and everything else. And I remember looking at that, and I remember turning around and looking at the band and saying, "I know where we're going wrong," because we weren't doing any of that. We'd walk up on stage like so many bands. We would walk up on the stage and talk to each other and tune the guitars and do all that kind of stuff right there in view of the audience. There was no surprise to it. And boy, I said, "Okay, we're going to go back to my house and we're going to practice 2 or 3 weeks. And our next engagement in Underground Atlanta, we're gonna look a little different from the way we looked before." And all the other bands didn't look like the Who or what we were thinking. So we
That's right.
we practiced and we came back down to the club we were in, and we just started it off that just the same way, Mark, that I was just describing the Who is doing it. And it didn't take, this is in an Underground Atlanta, it probably didn't take 45 minutes before hundreds of people were in the clubs where we were playing, and nobody was in the other clubs in Underground Atlanta. Everybody was watching us, and it was because it sounded good and because we had a show that was a killer.
Yeah.
And
I remember that.
yeah, yeah, it was just like, big lessons. You got to understand all of the details. You don't get by in music by not understanding details. You got to understand all of the things that you can do. Yeah, even if you're just a little band in Underground Atlanta. But because of that, it didn't take long before we weren't a little band in Underground Atlanta. We just, Craig, I don't know. That when we first started at Underground Atlanta, 300 people might be the biggest club in Underground Atlanta, but within a year we were playing places routinely that were 1,500 or 2,000 people, and even some coliseums at 18,000 people.
Yep.
So it was,
Yep.
but it was, paying attention and having the discipline to do it, and the creativity to come up with what that show needed to look like. And we were fortunate because we had Craig, who was a heck of a great guitar player, and we had Vic Hardy, who was a heck of a great singer, and right on down the line. And I was probably the worst musician in the bunch, but I knew how to organize.
And he did play the organ.
Yeah, I played the
He
organ.
played the organ and organized.
Yeah, I did all of that stuff. So,
That's you nailed it, John. So the bottom line is observation, and find people that are doing it right, and just don't reinvent the wheel.
that's right. That's
Apply
right.
it. Yeah. So many
That's
people
right.
don't get that. So well,
Yeah.
that's such an encouragement for people. As an artist, a lot of artists think that all they need to do is just be an artiste. Just be creative and just let it flow. And yeah, that's fine if you want to sit at home. And
Yeah.
there's an old joke. It's what do you call a I'm telling a joke and I can't remember it. What do you call a single guitar player?
Out of work.
Homeless.
Home.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And because you've got to be excellent at your craft, but you also have to apply work ethic and and creativity in marketing, in all aspects. So that's great. That's a great story. Really good story. So I want to shift us over to another side of this conversation. Back to our audience here. So John graduated from Georgia Tech. If I don't tell me yet, John. I want to see how well my memory is working still. You have a degree in aerospace engineering and microbiology. Did I get it right?
Yeah, and electrical engineering.
And electrical engineering. Oh, I missed one. So back in the 70s, if you had walked up into John's bedroom like I had many, many times, it didn't look like a normal bedroom. In fact, if you tried to find a bed, you would be hard pressed because everything was covered in electronics and circuit boards and wires and sheets of metal and everything else that went on, because John was building a synthesizer back when Keith Emerson had just popped out, and he had his giant synthesizer, and John said, I can do that. And so John was working on that. And then one day, John and I had a conversation. I remember it like it was yesterday. We were talking about frequencies. And if you have tuned into our other podcast with Otts Kilcher from Alaska, The Final Frontier, if you haven't heard it yet, you can go back and pull that off of Spotify or YouTube. Otts was talking about working with veterans and how nature, first of all, is healing. So he would take his veterans that were suffering out into the wilderness and just let them breathe in the air, just take in the quiet, and just enjoy the nature and let nature heal them, physically, mentally, spiritually. But the other aspect that we were talking about with Otts, John, was about frequencies and about music, how music can actually heal you and soothe you and change your emotions, not just the lyrics, because you can hear a song that has no lyrics, classical music, for instance, and it will hit an emotional spot in you that is just as strong as somebody saying words to you. And so I remember back in the 70s, you and I had this conversation. We were talking about the stage show, and it was all about how we were going to impress or control an audience, to come over to our side,
Right.
and like us. And whenever you touch somebody emotionally, once you do that with somebody, if it's in a good way, it's going to be a connection.